And what I hear that you're saying is that, both on the physical and energetic level, when we lose that other person, it seems like we really get disoriented. And I know, myself included, and other friends that have been grieving, that when you grieve, it almost seems the world is just going on, and you're time kind of stands still.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
It feels like a very lonely experience.
yeah.
Um, Partly because if you're lucky enough to get any support, it usually tapers off quickly after, the first few weeks. Um, and it's hard to know how to support someone in grief
Mm-hmm.
because it's individual. And um, I would just tell people to even just texting someone to say, I'm thinking about you, and not expecting a response
Mm-hmm.
because there may be a lot going on. It may
Yeah.
be over, but
Mm-hmm.
it does feel very lonely, and it's helpful to find, um, a support system like a grief circle or a therapist or a practitioner who
Mm-hmm.
has experience with it because it's very hard to describe. I know there's something called anticipatory grief
Mm-hmm.
where before the loss you actually
Mm-hmm.
start um, feeling the loss and grieving.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going through that for several years actually, as my parents went through health crisis after health crisis, and um, the end approaches.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very exhausting experience where you need a lot of support. But the other mysterious thing about it is, you think like, oh, well, I'm prepared. It's not going to take me by surprise when this happens. And then it happens, and you're like, oh my God, this is like a whole other level that it's really hard to put into words. It really is like a physical sensation where you just feel like the earth has dropped out beneath
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And it's on a physical level too. It's very common
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
have literal heart pains,
Mm-hmm.
um, shortness of breath, to have trouble sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a it's a full-bodied experience. It's not just like you see in the movies where someone goes to a funeral and cries and then gets on
Yeah.
with their life. Um, there was a book I read that mentioned, I'm gonna forget the location. It was I think it was an indigenous culture, an ancient culture that had a practice of when someone died, everyone in the community would physically rearrange their space in some way so that when the grieving person visited a friend, they would see that that person's house had also like physically changed because it
Mm-hmm.
was like a way to honor that like this loss has affected all of us and we've
Right.
made it physical and manifest. So I thought that was like a very powerful example. Um, Another good way to support someone is, um, I think people commonly are afraid to say the person's name who died because they'll think
Mm.
it might upset them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in the case of an estranged relationship, that is true.
Yep.
Would be careful of that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But in the case of an estranged relationship, you could say on Mother's Day, just say, "Hey, I'm thinking of you. I know this day might be tough for you." Um, or if someone has died, I think it can be really helpful to just share a memory of that person so that
Yes. Yeah.
goes, oh, you know, this loss that I feel so deeply has other people, and maybe you can share a memory that I know a couple of people shared memories of my parents that I had no clue about. And it made me so happy to expand my picture of them and be like, oh, I didn't know that they wrote those letters that you love so much. And um, so I think there are more ways to help than people might think. You don't have to like cook a casserole for someone. Um, just try and show up and listen and be understanding and as definitely non judgmental.
I agree about that because I remember after my grandmother and grandfather had passed, my uncle, he sent me some photos that I didn't have, of them. And then even of them with me, I guess I was too young and I just don't have all the photos. And it meant a lot to me just to be able
Yeah,
to
they're
see that side of them. Yeah.
right, such treasures. And when
Yes.
you too that how um, you have your experience of a person, and then you realize that every individual has been having a different experience of that person, and it
Right.
becomes this beautiful mosaic.
Yeah.
See how again you see how like tied together we all are in these
Yeah.
ways that we don't necessarily notice.
Yeah. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. And then the other interesting thing that we had discussed was over the past 2 years of the pandemic and everything else, political climate, and where we're becoming more and more polarized, it seems there have been a lot of friendship breakups, and that's something that's not really discussed when it comes to grief. And you had some interesting things to say about that.
Yeah, it's such a painful topic, and when you think, for a lot of people, their very first grief might be, the experience, and it often happens in junior high, where
Yeah.
start to get a little nasty, maybe,
Yeah. Yeah.
not maybe, but or like friend groups rearrange or reshuffle, or maybe
Yeah.
you part ways and go off to different schools, and
Yeah.
um, like and I think most people can remember how that leaves a mark in you of who am I now that I don't have this best friend in my life. What does it say about me that we drifted apart, or I tried everything but it's not working. So there's I think that is definitely a grieving process of its own, and it's really been amplified over the past couple of years because as you said, um, we haven't been able to spend much time
Mm-hmm.
physically, and it's harder to get the nuances through social media
Oh
posts.
yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
and it's just it's I think that unfortunately the media has encouraged a lot of fear mongering and a lot of like pick a camp,
Yes.
pro V, anti V,
Yeah.
no in between, and I think people's capacity was so low because everyone was renegotiating their life during the pandemic. Even if no one in your sphere died, um,
Mm-hmm.
to figure out childcare for
Yeah.
online schooling, or you had to figure out how to safely mask yourself and go off to an essential worker job. Or I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think anyone was unaffected, and so are just everyone was so exhausted that I don't think we had the extra bandwidth to. So I think a lot of people are just like, kind of severing ties, or just letting people drift away because they didn't have the energy to do anything more. Um, so it's a real loss, and it does go to your feeling of safety in the world when relationships feel more conditional than you thought they might have been.
Yes. Yeah.
You feel misunderstood, or like you didn't get a chance to say what you had to say or get some resolution. So I think that's definitely something that be healthier for people to maybe recognize and acknowledge and deal with in a healthy way, rather than just kind of numbing yourself out by scrolling more, or binge watching something to distract you, or
Yeah.
eating more ice cream. Or I mean,
Yeah.
those are all good strategies. I'll them all, um, but there are other practices that can help you kind of mine and experience for the kind of like, if you think of like in the fall, the leaves fall off the trees and die, but then they're slowly digested into the soil and nourished the next season's growth. So I think for any painful experience, there is some nourishment potentially to be had to give you strength to move forward in a more positive, energized way.
I love that. I love, yeah, that we can look to nature for comfort, knowing that, spring is always going to be followed by winter. Yeah.
Right.
So we did cover a little bit of, how grief affects us on different levels, but maybe we could go over them again. And I know that you said physically there are specific body parts that are affected more. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in Chinese medicine, which I have
Mm-hmm.
training in acupuncturist, each organ system actually has an emotion linked to it, a dominant
Mm-hmm.
emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so people may have heard that grief and sadness is
Mm-hmm.
most specifically tied to the lungs. And if
Mm-hmm.
you think about, how crying can literally leave you breathless when you have those racking sobs from extreme grief or sorrow. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and when you're really low too, you feel like you don't even know how you can breathe, go on breathing without your partner of 40 years or your mom or your child.
Mm-hmm.
So in in acupuncture, we would always treat the lung system as well as other things that were going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so because we're not body and mind separate. We're body and mind and spirit together,
Yeah.
and it's all connected. So I think unfortunately, if someone even seeks help for maybe not even necessarily grief, but maybe they'll go to a doctor and say, you know, um, my boyfriend died 2 months ago and I'm having trouble sleeping. Unfortunately, a lot of doctors will just take out their prescription pad and write you a prescription for a sleeping pill, or maybe an antidepressant or anti-anxiety. But for one thing, that's covering the symptom up and potentially weakening you further with different side effects. But it's also not honoring the natural process. Um, that there are energetic practices. The qigong is a rich tradition. I know you love qigong,
Yeah.
um, and another energetic practice like Reiki, or acupuncture. I consider an energetic practice. There are ways to support your emotional self and your physical self and moving the emotions through you and releasing them at a safe pace rather than trying to cover them, paper over them, bury them, suppress them, and just honoring it as a natural process. So there are definitely ways that you can support yourself. I'm not saying there's not a place for pharmaceuticals because there definitely is, and Western
Mm-hmm.
medicine, Eastern medicine integrate nicely,
Mm-hmm.
but it won't necessarily be the best first thing that you go to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I see too that I've had patients come to me because they know that I like working on an emotional level, and they'll come in saying, I just really need a good cry. And
Yes.
how therapeutic that can be to just let something well up in a place where it's kind of say you're held, you're not going to fall apart. You can slowly release what's inside without. I think people are afraid that they're just going to have like a complete breakdown, but there are practices that very gently help you kind of like gently touch the wound
Mm-hmm.
and they feel into it to see. Um, I like to think of it too when I lead people on energy practices, just the energy of, especially if you're, a black sheep and you didn't feel like you got the mothering you needed from your own mother. Um, there are ways to tap into that mothering energy that we all know in some form form or another. If it wasn't your own mother, maybe it was a teacher who was particularly kind and nurturing, or maybe a character in the movies or on TV that you're always like, I wish they were my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Tap into that energy and direct it to yourself and direct it to your own boo-boos and see how things soften when they're acknowledged and just treated tenderly, as opposed to we have so much inner judgment to say like, why aren't I over this yet, or I should just suck it up, or people, other people telling you like, why are you still talking about your dead mom, or all the you know unkind or just thoughtless things that people may say. um, I think it's really important to develop your own sense of nurturing yourself and your own energy, and from there, um, possibilities open up that seem out of reach when you're deep in denial or deep in the thick of